Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore our relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, A.C. Stauble
and Isaac Hill. So today on the Plant Cunning Podcast, we are very happy and honored to have Andrew Mason on the show. Andrew is a Indian alchemist. He's studied Ayurveda, astrology, lots of very fun things, but he's recently put out a book which is a update from a previous book, but vastly updated. There's so much in it. It's called Rasa Shastra. This is out from Aeon Books, and Aeon Books also did a fantastic job. This is basically the textbook on Indian alchemy in English now, and it's just very comprehensive. There's lots of pictures, and it's really a fantastic resource if you're interested in Ayurveda, in alchemy at all. So I'm happy to have it. Happy to be able to talk with you, Andrew. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. Nice to sort of meet you both. And yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a journey, this whole thing. I mean, the Aeon book worked out really well because I'd previously published in 2014 the original one, and although it was a kind of it was a process. I mean, I'd never written a book before, and it was a compilation of notes that I'd collected while I was studying. And Aeon came along after that book had kind of done its run and said, "Would you like to redo it?" I was initially a bit horrified about doing it again. I didn't want to sort of open that can of worms, but in the end it worked out right. I enjoyed rewriting it. It's literally a new book. I mean, it's not really, if you've got the first one, the second one's not the title's the same, but everything else has kind of been rewritten, and I've moved on a lot since I did that. It was almost 10 years since I wrote the first one. So second one's all color. It's kind of a fun read. It's got lots of nice pictures in there, and it kind of takes you through. And I think the first one was more of a compilation of lots of little bits put together, whereas this second one's kind of more kind of together. There's a definite thread that follows all the way through. So I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, it's definitely comprehensive.
Yeah.
There's everything you need to know to get started in Rasa Shastra, and you talk about Ayurveda and how Rasa Shastra fits into Ayurveda. We talk a little bit about Indian astrology and how the astrology fits into. So there's just a lot going on. You show how it's part of these larger systems, these larger sciences too. And I also like that in the book there's a good deal of like storytelling. So you tell your story of getting to Sri Lanka and finding the teachers and figuring out how to. So why don't you tell the audience how did you get into all this alchemy stuff, and how did what became this book come to be? How did you get interested in this?
Okay, well, it's a bit of a convoluted tale. I'll try and keep it as short as possible. I guess I really wasn't interested in anything alternative. I mean, my background's more kind of computers, graphics, that kind of thing. I wasn't really interested in anything. I mean, I used to do a little bit of painting and stuff as well. I was kind of into airbrush art and that kind of stuff, all kind of stuff.
That's cool.
And then I basically had a motorcycle accident and bashed myself up pretty badly. And it was a sort of long convalescence, going to see the doctor, getting all the pills and the potions, nothing worked. And it sort of forced me to try and find an alternative way to heal. I wasn't getting results just using conventional medicine. And then a friend of mine at that time, he'd recently just come back from India. He used to travel there a lot on business. And he picked up this book and threw me this paperback and said, "Here, I got this. I know you're into all this sort of weird stuff. You might like this." And it was a book on Ayurveda, an introductory book on Ayurveda. Very, very basic. I mean, literally like 100 pages, Indian book. Literally falling apart as you were reading it. It was just a kind of it was like my first inroad into it. And I saw all these kind of all this alien script and this sort of strange language. And you think, what the hell's this? It's just kind of crazy. But something in it just sort of spoke to me. And I realized that I just sensed that it had what I wanted, or it had an answer. So I started to look around for books that were written in English, and in a local bookstore, I found a book by Atreya Smith, who was, he's still practicing, well-known Ayurvedic physician, and he'd written a really good kind of introductory, and that was what really got me started. And at the back of that book, he talks a little bit about how some of these Ayurvedic medicines contain minerals, metals, and gemstones, which I thought at the time was a sort of throwaway. I didn't take it seriously. You just think, oh, well, how could that possibly be a medicine? But that was my first introductory to it. And then I found a local college that was doing a 4-year course. I say local, it was in London, so it wasn't that near me, but near enough to commute. And I signed up for it. It was a 4-year course. The last year they said there's an internship, so you get a placement in India. You can sort of like frontline battle stuff. You can see what's actually happening on the ground. So that I thought that's great. And then I did my 4 years there, and I was doing this in between working as well. And I think it was just coming to the end of that course, and I thought, well, rather than just throw myself in and go for the 3-month internship like everybody else, I'll go and do a short reconnaissance, just go for a month and just make sure it's going to be okay. And so 2 of my tutors were Sri Lankan, and I got on with them particularly well. And I said, well, I kind of fancy the idea of going to an island rather than going to India. I mean, India was a bit daunting at that time. I thought it might be a bit too much for me, I thought, I'm from an island, it's small, I might cope with it a bit better.
There you go.
So yeah, one of them said, look, a friend of mine runs a hospital in Colombo. Why don't you go there, just see if you like it? They were a bit mystified why I wanted to go to Sri Lanka, but they said, okay, if you really want to go. So I did that. I spent 2 weeks there, Christmas in 2003, I think it was. And I really liked it. I got on well with the people working there. It was a very small concern. They had a guy there who specialized in, there was like a beauty therapy thing, there was a fertility clinic, there was a diabetes clinic, there was a Ayurvedic surgery. I mean, kind of everything all under a very small, in a small space. So they rotated the doctors, so you could come in on a particular day and see a particular kind of physician. They had a general physician there who just covered all aspects of Ayurveda, but there were specialists in different areas. So I thought, this is good. I could do this. And I think it was the last day I was there, I got friendly with one of the junior doctors there, and he took me on a tour of the area in Colombo, and he took me to a local big Ayurvedic hospital there. And we went, he said, do you want to see the alchemy department? And I sort of jokingly said, what are they doing? Making gold? And sort of ha, ha, ha. And he said, well, you might like it. It's kind of strange, but it's all interesting. So, and as soon as I walked in and saw what they were doing with all these sort of minerals, and yeah, I just thought, wow, is this really medicine? Does it really work? Oh yeah, they said it's really good. So I thought, I really like to study this. And the doctor who was in charge of that department said, well, we can teach, I said, well, how long would I need? And she said, well, at least a year. And I thought, a year? God. Okay, well, I said, I'll think about it and I'll let you know. And I flew home literally the next day. And I think I realized on the flight back, that's really what I wanted to do. That's what I really wanted. And so I got back, I made plans. I was aiming to get out of the country around the end of the year. I had a business at that time, a printing business. I marched in and saw my business partner and told him I'd decided to quit, just basically buy me out. I put my house up for rent. I sold all my furniture, even my stereo, my prize stereo.
No way.
I just sold everything, just cleared. The whole house was empty when I left. And I even sold my car on the way to the airport.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I dropped it off at a friend's. He gave me some cash. I got in a cab and I got to the airport and took off. And the day I landed, I think it was the next morning, they'd already had the tsunami hit the island. That was the big tsunami in Christmas 2004, wasn't it? So the whole island was thrown into chaos. It was like amazing timing. Everyone was just running around like a headless chicken, just stuff was crazy.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, I'm stuck here now. I can't go back. I'd rented my house out. And everyone was calling me and saying, you ought to come back. It's too dangerous, blah, 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 blah. So that's it. I thought, well, I'm here. I'll make the best of it. And I tracked down all my previous contacts. I found this doctor again. And I said, right, I'm here. I'm ready to go. And she said, oh, I can't do it now. I've been transferred to another hospital. So she said, I'm sorry, I can't teach you. And I thought, oh, no. So I was kind of stuck then. So I thought, what am I going to do? I'm stuck here for a year. And luckily, one of the physicians at the hospital knew another lady who worked locally in another Ayurvedic hospital. And he said, look, she owes me a favor. I could kind of call it in for you. Ooh. And I said, well, let's go for it. And then this lady came in and she just bought a big bag full of paper, notes and things. And she said, I'm here at the request of this other doctor, let's start. And I said, well, when? She said, now. So that was it. So we just started. That was it. And I literally just spent almost a year there. I got up at 7 o'clock. As soon as the sun's up, I got up, I started, I worked all day. I stopped for half an hour at lunch and I was completely wiped out by about 7 o'clock in the evening. I just did that every day because there's nothing else to do. I mean, apart from having my laptop and being able to send her the odd email and, kind of watch a movie on a CD as it was back in those days.
Yeah, yeah.
There's nothing else to do. I mean, the lights all basically go out. It's a mosquito paradise at night, so you got to hide under a tent,
Hmm.
and that was it. That's how I spent my time there. And I was commuting backwards and forwards to the hospital worked with a factory which was about 15 miles away, which was in the jungle. So all my practical work had to be done there because of the nature of what it was. So I had to commute to this hospital when I was going to do actual preparations. So I was kind of on the bus backwards and forwards with cardboard boxes full of stuff, going to this place, coming home, working, and I just made my way through as much as I could do during that time. So I got very little time to sightsee. I didn't see much of the island, a little bit of touring here and there, but mostly every day was just work, work, work.
And what were you working on at the clinic? Like, what was the day-to-day task that you were doing?
Okay, so I suppose I should. So the clinic did lots of things. It had lots of different doctors there doing lots of different things, and I was always welcome to sit in on any class. So I could go to see the surgery. They were doing leeching if I wanted
That's
to
cool.
see that.
Yeah.
The fertility clinic, I wasn't allowed to see that because that's obviously ladies only.
Okay.
But apart from that, I mean, I had kind of like one-to-one with the doctor explaining how it all worked, but obviously I had no practical. And there was a guy there who specialized in kind of an indigenous version of Ayurveda, but specializing in diabetes cases, which was quite interesting. The general physician who just did anything, any kind of condition. And then the junior doctors who were just learning there. So they had like a good pharmacy there. I said they had this pharmacy out of town. I could go and see stuff as well, which was great. So my day would be just get up. I'd have a list of things that I were going to prepare. I would have already I would go into town and buy minerals as I required them. So I was doing like minerals, metals, gemstones. The gemstones was actually worked out okay. I thought that was going to be a real problem, but one of the partners at the clinic, I'm not sure if he was a business partner or just a good friend of the head doctor, he owned a gem mine.
Okay.
So I said, can I have some gemstones, please? And he said, well, I can't give you the sort of really expensive ones, but I could certainly give you some mediocre ones, to practice on. And I said, great. But he said, you come out to the mine and see what we do. So that was another thing. I ended up going to this gem mine and
Wow.
it was in the middle of nowhere, and you're climbing down this earthen shaft into darkness, and they're all working by candlelight down there. It's the most terrifying thing I've ever done. I mean, they literally tunnels go off in sort of 20 feet into darkness,
No,
and there's
thank you.
guys in there just chipping away and it's only sort of held up with wooden. It's barely a crawl space. You could just about get your body in there. And of course, I'm big compared with a Sri Lankan. So,
That's so scary. I could not do that.
No, I was
Good
like
job.
claustrophobic. I mean, the main tunnel and the little bit off into a couple of the branches was as far as I go. But they were sort of waving and laughing at me. Come on, come. They said,
And you're like, no.
And there's water in there as well, so you're kind of up to your waist in water.
That's insane. Yeah.
So they were doing Sri Lankan sapphires, Sri Lankan blue, moonstone. I mean, amazing the stuff that they had there.
Wow.
So I got all my gemstones. I went back. I was seeing this doctor. She would come in every night. She was working during the day. She would come in. She would give me the things that I had to do. She would say, right, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this is how we do it. And that was basically my day, making my way through these remedies and preparing. And I suppose I should give some background so people understand what this is, and that we're kind of talking as if we're all au fait, but should I just backtrack a little bit and explain? Sure. Okay, so Rasa Shastra, this is the title of the book. Rasa means lots of different things, but in the context of what we're talking about, Rasa tends to mean mercury. So quicksilver, so the elemental, Hg, the liquid metal. And Shastra would be like a path or a direction or a thread that you would follow. So it would be like the path of Mercury. So it means basically alchemy, because quicksilver is used to extract it can be worked with, and you can combine it with all the other metals to extract. So it's very good for extracting gold, silver. It was used primarily for a lot of those applications, actually in the mining process to collect gold and silver. So Rasa Shastra is itself a kind of standalone thing. If you go back and look at all the ancient texts, it was its own discipline. So alchemy was a kind of a stand apart, and it primarily focused on rejuvenation, elixirs, extending the life. That was its primary purpose. And it appears from studying the ancient texts that there was a lot of yogis that understood alchemy, and there were like Ayurvedic people who understood alchemy. But really, the three only kind of came together at a later period. They were very much their own separate discipline. So Ayurveda, for those that don't know, is the indigenous healing system of India. So this is working, it's a little bit like in the West, we had like the humours, the four humours, they have the three doshas, the same kind of principle. The body is sort of seen as an energetic engine or interplay of these doshas and sort of systems and channels. And it's like balancing the body. So it's not actually so much about healing the sick, it's trying to stop you getting sick in the first place. Its great strength is preparing the body and keeping you healthy so that you don't get sick. So obviously it has a big resource of medicines that they use. They have a big pharmacopoeia. Obviously it's hugely kind of herbal, but they use a lot of medicated oils, medicated ghees, all these different types of preparations. And then I guess what happened over time was that the alchemists kind of began to perfect a lot of these, these sort of potent remedies. And some were purely just elixirs designed for life extension, whereas others had more mundane uses. And what you can see what's happened over time is that they've begun to integrate those into the Ayurvedic medicine. So today, if you pick up a modern formulary of Ayurveda and you scroll through all the ingredients of all these recipes, you'll quite often find alchemical ingredients in there. It's not uncommon. In fact, I'd probably go as far as to say 50 or 60% of most well-known Ayurvedic recipes will have some alchemical ingredient. Now, it doesn't mean to say they're all full of mercury or gold. It could be something as simple as just chalk, like just calcium carbonates, which could come from seashells or something like that, to deer horns. It could be some kind of a gem, a powdered gemstone. And then it gets, into like the metals, the oxides of certain metals. So like iron, tin, lead, all these things that we sort of think, well, how could that possibly be a medicine? But they found a way to convert it into something which is then able to be absorbed by the body. So Rasa Shastra really is alchemy, but it is sort of own discipline within the Ayurvedic corpus, if you like. So it's kind of Ayurveda, but it's not. It's got its own standalone quality as well.
It's definitely integrated.
It's very, very integrated now. You go to most Ayurvedic pharmacies and there will be an alchemical workshop on site. Most of the big hospitals will have they'll be in there preparing copper or iron.
Cool.
It's usually the simpler stuff, obviously, because of the cost, and it's labor intensive as well. I prepared some slides so we could perhaps have a quick look and show you how a few of these things are done. But its great quality is that it's highly potent, and you only need a small amount, and there's no shelf life. So literally, once you've made it, it's very handy to put into a bag, travel, see people, and treat. You're not worried about seasonality, like herbs growing or not growing. Can I get it? Can't I get it? Once you prepared it, you only need a small amount, and it doesn't go off. Once you've formulated it, of course, you have to use it. But so what we'll see as we go through these sort of preparation slides in a bit is how all these things kind of come together. So I was saying to Isaac, we spoke previously about the fact that although you're very herbal, obviously you're, plant herbal people, for me, herbs are kind of more a means to an end. They're a way of connecting the minerals, gemstones, and metals with the human body. They're like the conduit. So what we use is a lot of herbal decoctions to be able to infuse these materials so that we can absorb them. They're bringing them closer to us. So you kind of go herbal, you go animal, then you go mineral, then you go gemstones, and then finally the metals. The metals are the most removed. So they take the most processing. It's a lot of processing to be able to bring that back to something we can assimilate.
Yeah.
That was a fun discussion too when we were talking about that. I mean, in Western astrology and Western alchemy, they nowadays usually tell you to start with plant spagyrics. Because they're sort of easier and they're easier to assimilate and to make. But it seems to me like in the way that Rasa Shastra is, like the plants, the herbs they're like a intermediary, and so I'm thinking like that's like the moon, the moon rules herbs in most traditional astrological systems. And the moon is also the planet that takes the light from the other planets and mediates it and brings it to the Earth, to the sublunary sphere,
Yeah.
you know. So it's fun to see plants as that lunar force.
Yeah, and definitely. I mean, the sort of patron of the alchemical arts in India is Shiva as well. So Shiva is always traditionally depicted with the moon. He wears the moon as a brooch, and the idea is that he saved the moon. The moon was cursed because he had these, well, what we call the sort of the lunar mansions or the nakshatras in India. They're the 27 brides, and he would spend one night with each of the brides, one night with each. But he favored one over the others, and he used to spend a little bit more time with her than any of the others. And of course, they all got jealous, and they cursed him with consumption. So he began to wane. He lost originally he was just bright all the time, bright and luminous, but he began to wane and fade away. And he was cursed to be just sort of disappear into darkness. And of course, then the people, the gods and the people said, we can't do without the moon. We need illumination at night. So they called on Shiva, said, look, he's got consumption now, which I guess in Ayurvedic terms is like they call it ojakshaya. It means just to lose your light, lose your luster, and just fade away. And it was kind of irreversible. So it called on Shiva's alchemical arts to restore him to his former glory. But he said there's a catch. He said, because just to make sure that you don't fall into the same trap again, I'm going to give you this medicine which will temporarily restore you, but you will then wane again. So to remind you not to do the same thing again. So the moon, of course, grateful to be saved, allowed Shiva to wear him as an ornament, in whatever. He's sometimes shown as the sort of crescent moon in the hair. So again, there's that kind of lunar connection, the sort of the full moon was seen as being sort of like when Ojas is a principle in Ayurveda, which means the body is rich and full and fully immunized. You are able to deal with anything the external world can throw upon you. You're kind of bright and radiant. So you can see already there's that connection to like the alchemical arts, those kind of medicines, and the way that they're restoring, creating immunity and restoring sort of youthfulness and luster to the body. And indeed, if you look at a lot of the formulas that these rasa medicines appear in, a lot of them are rasayanas. So rasayana means to like rasa again, like kind of mercury, and ayana is like a sort of it's like seasonal, like to change and to move. So it's like to restore, to give back youth, to make us young again. So a lot of those rasayana formulas have alchemical ingredients. So you can see that originally the alchemical arts were kind of mostly about elixirs, but also they've retained some of that quality, even though they've gone into more mundane medicines, but they still have that quality to rejuvenate.
Yeah, restore Ojas.
Definitely. Yeah, that's the aim. So it's a fascinating field. I mean, it's like when I kind of explain people what's involved, it's probably a little bit a big thing to explain in like a 1 hour thing like this, is to put it over succinctly and get people to understand it. That's why it's good to look at some images as well. But what I like about it is there's a sort of very prescribed tradition. You just follow the steps, you're given guides, you're told what things should look like and at what stage things should change. And you see this process of change, a bit like you were asking me last time. You said, is making ghee alchemy? Well, the answer is yes, because we're starting with one thing and ending with something else. And if you make it wrong, it's horrible. If you get it right, it's wonderful. And it's the same with this. It's like you are given a prescribed route or path to take, and these are the stages it should go through. So it should look a certain color, it should have a kind of weightlessness to it, it should be able to float on water at the end, it should be very, very light, and it should be able to feel the grooves on the fingertips. It should be very, very fine, very subtle, so it penetrates deeply into the body. And then when we combine it with herbs again at the end, we'll give it like a vehicle or an anapana, which helps that be absorbed better. You select a herb that's suited to that particular person, or it's already has an affinity with that type of tissue. So let's take a mineral like serpentine, which is magnesium silicate. So that's very good for heart conditions. If you've got any heart problems, or if you've got any kind of toxicity issues. So it's usually combined with a herb that has some kind of blood affinity with blood and the heart. So it not only has that healing quality, but those herbs as a vehicle take it to that tissue and that organ as well. So that's how they're kind of combined. So they kind of, we use those during processes. So we'll use like rose water in the initial stages of processing serpentine, but then something like Arjuna as an actual vehicle at the end. So at all stages, it's kind of cooling, blood orientated, circulating, that kind of.
Right.
So cool.
Yeah, and before we get to the images, which we should probably do soon, but what are some of the herbs you use? And like it seems as though in the book, a lot of them are poisons. Why?
Yes.
Why? Why are they poisons?
Because a lot of the materials are poisonous. It's not that they're, I mean, anything's poisonous, right? I mean, if you drink
Yeah.
enough water, it'll kill you. So it's just there are obviously some well-known poisons in there. So like obviously mercury's top. You've got sort of the arsenics, the antimonies, those kind of metalloids, those sort of things that are between a metal and a mineral. It's the things that are kind of got a greasy quality that stick. One thing you notice is when you're mixing in a pestle and mortar, how much stick these things have onto the porcelain. Like, do they make the porcelain dirty, or when you grind it, do they end up being quite clean? That already tells you what it's going to do. So like a lot of these kind of toxic ones are sticky, they're like messy, they leave lots of mess on the porcelain, they'll discolor things, or they stain a lot, they take a lot of removing from your fingertips. That already tells you that they have that sort of sticky quality. They get that, so that's going to need to be removed. And as you process, they get cleaner. They leave less residue. They wash off easily, so you can actually physically see these things getting lighter. Now, does it mean that we take something that's toxic and make it non-toxic? No, it's still toxic, but what we're doing is we're removing the highly toxic nature and we're making it more assimilatable. And then, of course, the last bit of toxicity, we're regulating by combining with certain types of herbs, taking at certain times something that's suitable for that person, because it's individualistic medicine. It's not mechanistic. It doesn't one size fits all. You're looking at the individual. So different individuals have a different ability to deal with poisons. And then also the dosage is critical. So that's how it's dealt with. So mercury doesn't suddenly become like non-toxic. You could just knock back, cups and cups of it. It's still toxic, but we've removed a lot of the toxic elements from it by the time it's become a medicinal material.
And then what are these, like mercury or arsenic, things that are like poison in certain doses? Like, how does it work that it's actually healing us once we ingest it after this process has been done?
Okay, so you were just saying a little bit about using the poisonous herbs as well. So poison and poison equals purity. So like there's a kind of like and like together it sort of annihilates. It has that ability to. They see poison and nectar as the same thing. It's on this like a coin with two faces. One side's toxic, one side's nectar. So they both have the poison. They both have the property. So poison can become nectar, but nectar could be poisoned as well. So they see all these elements like, just by purifying them in the right way, you can release all their healing properties. So for instance, you use quite a lot of poisonous materials to purify mercury because they stimulate the mercury to release its own poison. It has an inherent poison quality. So by mixing it with these poisonous herbs, it allows that poison to be released. And you can quite often see that when they're sort of watching the liquids change as they're being mixed. You can see that some liquids will split mercury into little beads, some will discolor it, some will make it like a paste. So I like. So what's your dog called?
This is Pop-Tart or Percy.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Persimmon. He's been barking a little
whining.
bit, so we.
That's good. Get him on the show.
Yes, need a little attention.
So I think it's a little bit of a convoluted tale to explain, but yes, I mean there are a lot of poisonous herbs that are used, and they in themselves will be used in a lot of formulas. So it's not necessary that all poisonous herbs will be used to purify toxic metals and minerals. Poisonous herbs will be used in their own right. So like the daturas, aconites, they're very potent. I mean, they're incredible. Yeah. Again, they still everything has to undergo some level of purification. It could be something very simple like just boiling it in milk, or it might be something more complex. You might have to fry it in ghee, or it might have to be infused into an oil. Some are only recommended for external application, but assume everything needs some level of purification.
Yeah, so it's similar for like an herbalist working with sort of the more toxic plants. Like it really depends on the dosage and how you prepare it, and then your relationship with the plant too. Like how you've been trained to use it or to work with it.
Do you find that when you're working with some, you just feel a natural affinity to some and not to others? Do you, when you're working, you think, oh, I really like this plant. It really works well for me. Even touching it has a kind of a healthy feel.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
And
the
I'm
same
just,
thing with minerals.
yeah. And I'm thinking about like Datura as well as an example. I was in a class with indigenous African healer. Like her father was an indigenous African healer, and his relationship with Datura was he walked outside his door and saw it, every morning. And it was like one of his plant allies. And he didn't have this like fear around it. And he knew how to work with it and how to dose it. And he used it topically to help somebody who had like an extreme edema situation. And then as a Western herbalist, I was more taught to like fear it or just grow it in the garden for beauty, but not necessarily like use it to ingest or topical because there was this like fear of it as a poison. But if you're raised, or work with the plant in a certain way, then it's going to change like how it interacts with you and with other people that you're using it with.
Definitely. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like that with the minerals and metals. You just get a feel for the ones that really work for you. Some you just think you just feel well just handling them, even in the raw state.
Sure.
Others don't really do anything, and I struggle to work with them. But what I try to do in my time in Sri Lanka and what I've carried on doing since I've come back is just to try and do as many as I could. So I can't think that there's within the sort of you could think of it as what would you call it, like the table of elements, if you like, that are available. I think I've worked with most of them now.
That's
Wow.
cool.
Which was really good. Yeah. And it's given me a good understanding of what to do and what not to do with them and how to work with them, which is great. But there are a few that I will just constantly be making again and again, just because I'm working with them. But yeah.
Yeah. So who are your homies? Who are your best buds?
Probably the serpentine is one of my favorites. I use that a lot. It's a really good remedy. Jade is really good as well.
Ooh, yeah.
Lapis and turquoise are both good as well. I mean, they're all good, but there are some that are particularly good. Like I find really strange agate is like amazing. Anything
cool.
the sort of the head, the jaw, the teeth, nasal stuff, anything like that, anything around this sort of head jaw area just works really, really well. Like any sort of dental problems. It's a really, really good mineral. And then quartz is another good one. It's a bit like a sort of a poor man's diamond in Rasa. If you can't afford to work with diamonds, you use quartz. But yeah.
And what is that one? What's quartz used for?
Well, diamond has a sort of an affinity going back to like the Jyotish connection. It's kind of Venus again, so it's like chakra, so it's all to do with immunity. So they use that for a lot of autoimmune diseases and stuff like that.
Me, cool.
So it's a really good. And anything, any sort of diseases considered to have a Venusian sort of influence would you can use both the metals and the gems have planetary connections. So they're the seven metals and the seven planets, and there are seven primary gemstones. There are secondaries, of course. You don't have to use. So you could use spinel instead of red coral or something for Mars. So
right.
Cheaper elements, yeah.
So you can use you can use quartz instead of diamond. You find that?
Yeah, I find it equally as good if you prepare it properly. A lot of it is the intention and just doing it properly. There are no shortcuts, unfortunately, and it is a bit of a process. It can take quite a long time to make these things. So, they need many, many cooks constantly cycling through this process. I mean, I'll show you on some of the slides. We can have a quick look at some of the.
Yeah, like we're not just like swallowing Herkimer diamonds here, like we're really close. So show us like how it's done.
Okay,
like just a little bit about the process.
Yeah, sometimes it's better pictures paint 1,000 words, right? So let's have a look.
So for folks who are just listening, if you wanted to switch over to the YouTube to see some visuals, Andrew's going to be sharing his screen to show us the process of making some of these.
So if I do that now, are you seeing the full screen?
It's great.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Is that Shiva?
Yeah, I need to go back to, I seem to have gone to the wrong slide there. Oh, because we ran through it before we started. Here we go.
Right. Okay. Start at the top.
There we go.
Cool.
There we go. Yeah, it's a kind of Shiva appearing in the mercury. It's a graphic. It didn't really happen, but you do see some weird stuff when you're mixing it.
That's cool.
There's the moon that we were talking about there. So like moon. Okay, so it's always good to auspicious to start with Shiva, just because he is the kind of the patron of this system. So let's start with Shankar. So Shankar's conch shell. These are very popular. They appear in a lot of different remedies, used for a lot of different things. So it's just processing or reducing this down to a a powder that we can actually use. So the first stage is usually just washing in. I mean, I know they've been in the ocean, but we start by washing them in a solution of just rock salt and water. Just leave them for a day, just to sort of soak clean all. If you get all the debris and clean the shells up as much as possible. And then the next stage is you basically boil them in vinegar. So this is a little gadget. I mean, you've got to remember, these pictures are slightly over the top photographic quality because I was using them for a presentation where I had to make it look like it was, like I'd spent hours and hours doing it, which I did. But so obviously they just look photographically amazing, but I don't normally do it like this. I would do it on a gas burner, but this is a little hand burner I made out of clay. So they'll be boiled in vinegar for about 3 hours. And what happens is the vinegar will start to attack or weaken the shell. It just softens or makes the shell brittle so that we can break it up. And that's after processing. So after the vinegar treatment, you can see it's already begun to kind of erode or eat away. It's like taking some of the thickness of the calcium away and making it a bit more brittle. So then we break those up with a pestle and mortar, break it down into sort of smallish pieces. It's actually quite easy to break. They're almost impossible to break if you don't do the vinegar first. But once the vinegar's been in there, it really sort of makes it brittle and accessible. And then it grinds down to just a fine white flour sort of material, it's like white flour. And that's sieved. We have different grades for different sort of levels of powder. Initially at this stage, we just want to get it as fine as we can, get it as smooth and the particle size as regular as possible. And then it's mixed with milk. And then the milk is used a lot in Rasa Shastra. It's a very popular grinding medium. It's added to a lot of different things. Milk has all special qualities, a kind of sweetness, a cooling quality. It's like very sattvic. It already has an affinity with the reproductive tissue in the body. So it's able to penetrate deeply into the body. So it's just seen as an excellent vehicle to grind. So it also has an affinity with destroying poisons as well. Quite often they'll put toxic material into milk to see what sort of reaction they get. Sometimes you can see a reaction, particularly if you don't process things properly, and then it's kind of put back into milk, you can see that there's a sort of an adverse reaction. So milk is a very popular liquid. We'll grind that with this powder. And we make these little discs. Sometimes they're pills, but flat discs are quite good. They just call those little chakrakas, little wheels. And then those will be laid inside they'll be dried and laid inside a crucible, and then we're going to burn them. So the principal material we're going to use to burn is cow dung. So these are cakes that I've prepared. Now I know in India, they'll just kind of pick them up and do it by hand and, pat them down and then throw them on a wall. And then when they're dry, they fall off. I did some testing with heat. So I needed to know, exactly how much heat was being produced and how much I was putting in. So I had to standardize the cakes. So I just got into making them. I can make them very quickly. So, literally I sort of make 1,000 of these and then just dry them and just put them into storage and use them as I need them. So this is what we call a putter. It's literally a hole in the ground, and we'll have put our crucible with our cakes, our little chakrakas are inside that, underneath all those cow dungs. And then we just burn those, set fire to those and just burn those slowly. They'll take about 3 hours, 3.5 hours to burn down. You just end up with all this white ash. And these putters produce somewhere around anywhere between 750 and 1,000 degrees, depending on the size of the putter. The bigger they are, it's not that the bigger ones produce more heat, it's just they sustain heat longer. So they'll say for certain types of materials you need more sustained heat, so you need a bigger putter. So they'll describe the putters in terms of animal sizes. So Gaja putter means elephant putter, or Varaha putter is a boar, like a pig.
Yeah.
Pig-sized putter. So
Makes sense.
It's just kind of terminology to so we're all on the same page and we know what sort of size we're digging these holes.
Totally.
And then you open up the crucible afterwards, and that's what's happened to the material. It started to reduce. It's like the first stage of its reduction. And then what we would do is we'd take these little chakraka out again that you see here, and then repowder them, mix them with milk again, and you'd repeat that process. And then they would be done a third time. And then finally, the fourth time, it's either milk again, or depending on how we're going to use them, they might be mixed with a herbal decoction, something like bringa, which is quite popular. But that's where it comes down to individual formulations and you know what you're tailoring this medicine to. The great thing about these formulas is that you can tailor them to suit certain conditions more. So, for instance, instead of using milk, they might use aloe gel or something like that. It comes down to what you're looking to do with the finished remedy and how you're looking to incorporate it. So, you know, it's very flexible. It's a very large, it's a larger, big approach. You can take many different paths. It's just, you know, what you've been taught to do and what end you're seeking to attain. And then that's kind of the bhasma at the end. That's like the finished ash. You'll end up with a sort of grayish, like a grayish white ash. It's very, very fine. I mean, that's just sprinkled on water. You can see even when it's got fairly large lumps, the surface tension of the water won't allow it to sink. So that's one of the sort of tests that you'll perform afterwards. It's quite often it'll be thrown back into fire to see if it smokes. That's a bad sign. It should be inert. It should have no taste. It should be very light. It should fill the fingertips. You know, it should be very, very, very fine. And then that just gives it the ability to penetrate deeply into the body.
So what is the conch used for mainly?
A conch. So, I mean, obviously calcium carbonate. So if you've got any kind of like bone assimilation problems, osteoporosis, all those kind of things, osteoarthritis, but also it has an affinity with the eyes. So it's very good for like cataracts, hearing conditions like sort of tinnitus, ringing in the ears, that kind of thing. I mean, many applications depending on, again, it's like there are kind of its mainstays, what it's most useful for. But again, you would maybe change the formula at the end by adding other herbs to send it on another type of vehicle in another direction. So, you know, the many applications. It's a very popular remedy and it appears in many things. You could think about it as primarily as like a stabilizer to add strength, to promote strength in the body, to aid in structuring. You know, it's seen to have an ability to remove poisons as well. So if you have like a lot of toxicity in the body, you know, it has an alkalinity, so it kind of reduces an acidic. It's sort of acidic and heat. It's sort of good for reducing all of those sort of conditions in the body.
So it like reduces pitta too?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, it would be good for vata because it kind of adds structure to the body as well.
Right.
And it has a lightness, so it's kind of reduces kapha as well. So it's kind of like it's across the board. It's sort of super useful. And the conch is sort of seen as being like it's symbolic of a lot of things. Again, it's connected to Shiva as well. You know, it has this kind of like pervasive quality. You know, like the conch is blown, isn't it? You get like that amazing sound, like the Om, isn't it? Like the sound of Om. It's like penetrating. It's its ability to penetrate and go deep. And that the same principle applies for, say, something like cowrie shell. It's exactly the same principle, except this time these are kind of more heating. So these are better for sort of more digestive conditions. So it's like people that have got, like, they say grahinis, like difficult to absorb, you know, different absorption issues like small intestine, excess pitta, but for like clearing out and sort of aiding in the assimilation of, you know, so you're not overcooking the food, you're kind of digesting properly, regulating the digestive process. Again, these are used for kind of like hearing issues as well. They've got lots of again, it's like there's not one size fits all. It depends on what your ultimate aim or your use for it's going to be. So that kind of concludes that would be the same pretty much for things like deer horn. I mean, goat bone. Usually the femur of the goat is used quite a lot. You've got things like the deer horn as well. I mean, any of the shells, that goes for just regular chalk. I mean, there are many. There's fossilized material. They're called God, I can't think of it.
Ammonites?
Like an ammonite, but it's a I think it's called a crinoid. It's a fossilized aqueous plant. So they're rich in silicon as well. But it's the same process again. They're used for a lot of, if you get like urinary calculi or that kind of stuff. It has an affinity with the urinary tract. But again, exactly the same process. So it will be ground, mixed with herbs, burnt, reground, and again and again and again until you reach a point where the bhasma or the finished ash. It's a particular kind of grade.
And then what are you doing with the finished ash as far as taking it internally? Are you
Some of them can be taken singularly. So like things like pravala, like red coral, can just be taken as a remedy. That's just good to just go. You can just take that straight as is. It's only red coral ground with rose water, repeatedly ground to a very, very fine powder. They call it a pishti. But other things like this will generally be formulated. These will go into like more complex formulas. So it will be mixed with other herbal ingredients. Like trifla is quite popular with the use with conch. There's lots of, whatever the actual formula is going to be. The formulas are quite involved and large. Sometimes they can have like 20 plus ingredients, but this might be a mainstay of that formula. So like I say, if you read through the Indian formulary of any popular Ayurvedic combinations, quite often there'll be an alchemical ingredient, and it might be something as simple as a seashell or a deer horn, or it doesn't have to be like a metal. They don't constitute the mainstay. I mean, these materials are very cheap and easily available.
Cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So just something as simple as this is Nagundi, so a medicated oil. Very popular herb. So Thailand is just an oil. It just means it's a medicated oil. This is the dried tuber of this plant here. This is Gloriosa. So it's a toxic. It's flame lily. So it's a toxic tuber. It's kind of like mildly toxic. I mean, if you ate a whole one, it probably wouldn't do you any good. Particularly, might even kill you if you were elderly or young. But the actual tuber is dried, sliced, and to purify it, it's soaked for 24 hours in cow urine. That's the prescribed. I mean, you'll find this again and again. Cow urine is such a popular purifying liquid. I mean, it's used for iron. It's a mainstay for the purification of iron. Very popular. Iron will be soaked in cow urine first, and then it will be literally heated and then quenched in cow urine. So very popular liquid, appears in lots of different remedies. It's even used a lot in processing for shilajit, which has become a very popular remedy. So quite often it's cooked in cow urine to purify it. So these tubers are soaked 24 hours overnight, dried, sliced, and then we end up with what you see here, the dried tuber. And then that's ground and powdered. There's the Nagundi. We make a decoction. And then some turmeric as well, fresh turmeric. There's a number of other herbs used in there, I think manjester as well. These are all combined. You produce all these different decoctions. So one rasa ingredient, which is the langli, which is the toxic ingredient, you combine it with all these other herbal ingredients. They go down into a final decoction. Then we add sesame seed oil and then a little bit of milk. Generally, if you work with sesame, you always add some milk just to help in its assimilation. And basically cook that down over many hours, 8 to 10 hours of very low heat, slow evaporation of all the liquids. You see it going through it. This is the kind of alchemical process. You get all these amazing colors come up, sort of greens and yellows and reds. You comb off or reduce all of these excess. This is considered like the waste, the unwanted material that's coming off. It's just sort of combed off and collected and removed from the oil.
Okay.
And then finally, I mean, I just put it through a copy filter paper, but people just use cloth as well. And then you just end up with your finished oil, oil, which is absolutely amazing. There's not one skin condition I haven't found it's useful for.
Really?
Inflamed gums to itchy bites, athlete's foot, you name it. I mean, whatever your condition, if you've got any skin conditions, this stuff is just amazing. I can't recommend it enough. And weirdly, when I did a little bit of research on the flame lily, it's getting quite popular now. There's a lot of research being done on it. It has a lot of anti-cancer properties. They're seeing it, it's sort of, it has an affinity with blood and to remove stagnant blood, to improve blood flow and circulation and sort of remove stagnant blood.
And that red color, you can kind of tell, right? Like that it's got an affinity to the blood.
Well, the redness here was probably more the turmeric than the actual the decoction of the flame lily is just very mundane. It's called
the color of the flower was also like
absolutely
red and, yeah,
it's called they call it Rakta Pushpa. So Rakta means blood, Pushpa is flower, so like blood flower. So it's already known to have a good. I think even just during pregnancy, during the actual delivery process, just holding the root reduces labor pains.
Wow.
As it sort of combines with the hand and the sweat, and it gets absorbed into the body. It's that potent.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, and then just because Isaac had asked to see a little, he was kind of fascinated with the mercury. So obviously this is the kind of the other end of the spectrum. This is where we're getting a lot more alchemical now, because You move into the metals, and there's lots of techniques for removing toxicity and working with mercury. It's a difficult, problematic metal to work with because it has kind of two things going. It has an inherent toxicity, but they also believe that it has kind of poisons that have been put into it intentionally. The story goes that kind of Shiva gave the mercury to the world to heal humanity if it can heal any disease. But the Nagas were kind of the snake people were kind of fearful that we get too powerful. You know, we start even like becoming like a bit like them, a bit immortal.
Oh.
So what they did was they stole all the good stuff and hid it underground. The Naga folk are typically always sort of like subterranean people. So they stole all the good stuff, and what they left on the surface of the earth, they contaminated, they poisoned. So Shiva said, okay, well, I know you've only got the poison stuff now, but I'll show you how you can remove the poison.
Purify it. Wow.
So this is the story of how we kind of work with it. Now, this is going to be a real whistle stop because I'm trying to compress like months of information into like 5 minutes, but I'll do my best. So there are lots of different ways you can do this. Classically, there's what they call asa samskara, which means there are 8 processes that must be applied really to make it safe. However, being people, they've developed other methods. So there's a 3-method system that's used quite popularly now. So I'll give you a quick overview of how it would be done in, like, if you go into a modern day pharmacy. So this is Himalayan garlic. It's a really interesting garlic. It's very, very sweet. You can literally just eat it. You can just pop the shells off and just eat it. And it's really, really tasty. So this is the ideal or the best garlic for doing mercury preparation. So literally you harvest your garlic. This is Himalayan garlic, de-shell it, liquefy it, and then it's added to the mercury. And then we begin mixing. So the process is you literally sit there, you decide on your direction. So you're going to do it clockwise or anti-clockwise. Doesn't matter which one you pick, but you just have to stick with it. This is all part and parcel of the ritual. And then off you go. And it's just literally 9 hours of stirring.
Oh,
so now that's not 9 hours, like no break. So you could do like what I was tending to do was do about 2 hours and then stop, never have a cup of tea or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, I did it over several days, obviously. But the idea was 9 hours is a sort of a good amount of time that you should do this stirring for. And during this process of stirring, it undergoes lots of changes. It gets very sort of thick, it gets very greasy, then it gets light, and it gets kind of greeny in color. And then at the end of that processing period, it needs to be washed. So the idea is you've mixed it with the garlic. The garlic has lots of anti-poison properties. It's sucking all the sort of the venomous material out of the mercury, and it's being released and absorbing it. And there's a kind of a high sulfur content. Sulfur and mercury are very compatible, or very bonded elements. So you wash the mercury at the end. It's like a tedious process. You've got to wash it all with vinegar. And what you end up with is basically what you started with: clear, shiny silver mercury again. So that's stage 1. Stage 2 is the betel leaf or the betel leaf. This is popular. I mean, this is a medicinal plant. They chew this a lot, in Sri Lanka. It's quite a sort of they mix it with the nut, and they sort of chew it it's like a sort of mild narcotic. But this leaf is also called pan. It's supposed to be like the cobra, like it's supposed to look like the hood of the cobra. So we extract the juice from these leaves and we mix it with the mercury. This is the second process.
Oh, that's pretty.
Immediately that you add it, it just breaks it into like beads. The mercury no longer is a liquid. It just breaks into like millions of little beads. And again, 9 hours. Stir, 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 stir. Again, you get the same thing. You get all this black material come off, all this kind of sludge. It's a big...
And the leaf, when you said extract it, was that as a tea?
Juice.
Or juice?
Juice, sorry, yes. You juice the leaves, yeah. Yeah, sorry if I'm jumping stuff. It's because I'm trying to compress this for you.
Take it,
Take your time. This is so pretty, all these little mercury beads.
Yeah, they literally stay like that to the end. They don't conjoin. Wash them. So that it separates them all out. You get this nice kind of greeny liquid.
That's cool.
And as you stir it, you get all this kind of sludge, this like blackish sludge come off. And at the end of the 9 hours, it's washed again in vinegar. And you end up again with, as you started with, you get this nice shiny, pure, homogeneous pool of liquid mercury. That's just a close-up of the pestle and mortar during, you can see even in minute, spaces, it still retains its bead. It really just pulverizes into billions of little balls.
So cool.
And then it's washed again. And
Look
then
at that.
it actually made a moon. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I love it.
So that's trifla decoction. So we make a decoction from trifla. So we get the actual bibitake, haritake, amalaki, all the seeds dried, break them into a rough powder, make a decoction from them. So it's usually like 8 parts water to 1 part seeds, and then reduced to 1 part liquid. There's lots of different ratios depending on what you're going to do with the decoction. And then same again, another 9 hours, mix. And then finally, after that, the last wash, it's considered purified. That's a sort of very simplistic, simplistic technique. And people sort of say, well, so then what do you do with it? You still end up with mercury. Well, then it has to be combined with sulfur and then made into a sulfide. We can't, it's not assimilatable in the form of a liquid metal, but once we combine it with sulfur, it will be. But that's just the first part of the process. That's just to remove the inherent toxicities of mercury. It's said to contain, impure mercury contains elements of lead. It has some tin in it, which have to be removed, possibly copper. There is natural dirt, and then it has its own poison that it was contaminated with. So these 5 things need to be removed. And the 3 processes I've just described are said to adequately remove those. Now, remember in the ancient texts, it says you should do the asta samskara. It should be 8. There are 8 wonderful, really super. If you thought that was awkward to do, then the 8 are like a nightmare. I mean, it's an interesting process, and I do or had done both. So it depends on whether you really, what your aim is, what you want to do with it, and how do you want to go with the modern method, or do you want to stick to the traditional method? So I've done both. I find both okay. They both work. 3 and 8 are fine. I like the 8 method because it's so involved, but that's just me. I'm a glutton for punishment.
Kind of about the process too, not just the product for you, right? Like you love making them. So
yeah, I'm a practical person, so I like to just make stuff. I mean, I enjoy seeing it undergo its changes, and you understand it more when you see it go through all these. The 8 method, you feed it, you make it swell, it becomes lethargic. You have to then get it to sort of vomit, if you like, and then you kind of remove its jitteriness, and then you kind of pacify it. There are all these little terms that they use, and it can be sublimated. So you'll be sublimating it upwards, downwards, side to side. There are lots of different processes that it undergoes, and essentially you end up with what you start with. It doesn't look any different at the end than it does from the beginning. But the idea is that all the mala, these waste products, have been removed during that process. And you definitely see these products. I mean, you get this stuff like cheesy sort of butter come off of it. It's like, in fact, actually, I've got pictures. There we go. That's another set of photographs from this is a South Indian tradition. So they just use turmeric and brick dust. They don't use any of those 3 liquids. They just use a combination of those 2 materials, and they have their own processing method. But you can see it undergoes, using the turmeric method again, it sort of splits it into those beads. This is a sort of buttery gray sludge. It goes through this sort of like pasty substance, and it gets very buttery. And then this is the trifle. You end up with all this kind of like brown. Yeah, it's like, I had to describe it really. It's a bit like sort of cement. Water, like very watery cement, and it does feel quite gritty. It's quite weird. Yeah. So you can see all these. This is you can actually see these things that they're describing in the text, which is super interesting. So, and then just rounding up, obviously to convert it into what we call a black sulfide, has to be combined with sulfur. So sulfur, a natural element, abundant, very easy to obtain. This is just some regular, most stuff is chemically produced. It's a byproduct of the petroleum industry, but if you can get fresh volcanic sulfur, it's better. Sulfur, again, has to be purified before it can be combined with mercury, because it too has poisons in it, or, as we are told in the text, it contains things like arsenic, borax and tourmalines and all kinds of weird stuff. This is where it's been harvested naturally around sulfur vents. It's got lots of contaminants. So sulfur, the method for purifying is we liquefy it, you heat it up, turn it into a liquid, mix it with ghee, and then pour it into milk, and then it reconstitutes again. And you just repeat that process about 6 times, and then it's considered to be pure. And then they can be combined. So here we have purified sulfur, the purified mercury. These two are mixed together, and eventually you end up with this kind of black.
That's cool.
It's not a finished powder. This is about halfway through, but you can see that what you end up with is a matte black, very, very fine powder. And the sulfur and mercury form a unique bond. They're very, very stable. So once it's become a black powder, it basically stays like that, unless you subject it to heat, in which case it will separate again. You'll liquefy the sulfur and you'll burn off the mercury, but it becomes a very sort of super stable material. And that black powder is then, going full circle, is what actually gets incorporated into a lot of rasa formulas. So, I mean, that's kind of like a very whistle-stop tour of mercury processing. That's just another, that's just like further on in the processing. I just kind of ended it there. And then we end with a gold. We started with a silver sheave and we end up with a solid gold.
Nice. I love it.
I'll stop that now.
When you're working with mercury or other, things that can be toxic, are you worried before it's been purified about it splashing up on you or your hands as you're using the mortar and pestle for 9 hours,
Yeah, I mean,
I
unfortunately in the UK we can't use it anymore because it's considered a banned substance. So I was doing a lot of this work sort of like prior to 2016. So I mean, I haven't worked with it for a long time, but yes, of course. I mean, it's not a safe thing to use. The weird thing about it is it's most dangerous when it's in a gas form. Its gaseous form is the most toxic. So really you want to make sure that if you're working with it, you've got respirators, you're not exposed to the fumes at any time. Handling it's not such a problem, just, handling it in its liquid state. Obviously it amalgams with metals, so don't go wearing any gold rings while you're doing it, because obviously it will form a bond with a number of metals. It just bond. That's where you get like the dental amalgam. It's basically an alloy of sort of mercury, silver, and copper, and all kinds of, well, not copper, but those kind of amalgam. And in its amalgam state, then it can be used as a filling material. So yeah, you've got to be really careful with it. It's not. I think what I want to put over in this is I don't want to make it sound like this is the be all and end all. This system uses a lot of materials, and this is considered like the highest material. It has the most potential. So generally medicines that have the mercury base are considered the most potent. However, there are many other materials and they're all very, very good, and they appear in a lot of formulas. So although we tend to think of like Rasa Shastra, like mercury as the highest thing, there are lots of other things that we can use. So and there are toxic plants, there are gemstones, there are metals, there are animal products. All of them have amazing uses, but it's this purification process and the application of them afterwards where they have their real potency. They create a lot of potency in the formula. Yeah.
It was great to see those visuals.
Yeah, that was really cool.
I think that's the only, you got to see it, because this is when I was reading the books when I first started. I thought, what the hell are they talking about?
Yeah.
And when you see it, you think, oh, it makes perfect sense. Now I understand. It's
that's also one of the things I love about the book, is that there are so many pictures.
Yeah, I figured it was just, they wanted to do it as a color book this time, which is great. And well, if we're going to do it color, let's try and get as many pictures in as we can.
Yes.
And I've tried to do a mix of graphics and photographs. And there's a good section, I think in the mercury section, I've actually shown you all 8 Asta Samskara, so you can see at least parts of the process, not the whole thing. It's too involved. But yeah, it's been a fascinating tool. I love working with it. It's a really interesting, I mean, I love Ayurveda anyway, so it's great to just see all these aspects of, I love looking at the formulas and seeing, right, what's it got in it, what's alchemical, how have they done that. And when I've been teaching workshops for I teach at the college where I study, actually, and I do their summer camp. So students come for the summer camp, and we make stuff, and they really get an insight into the medicine making side of it, because so often they're just reading about the theory, but to actually see just making an oil, or just making a medicated ghee, or just making an avaleha, one of the Ayurvedic jams, working with the sort of sugars and the fruits and then putting these ingredients in, they really get a sense of what it's about. And when they look at the products after that, they suddenly think, now I understand how that's made.
Yes.
It's not so, we wouldn't be so flippant with it. They understand the work that's gone into that.
True. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. You can just see like a powder and be like, oh, whatever. It's just like a powder. When you see how much work went into making that powder.
Yeah.
Yes.
Until you've made it, and then you realize how precious it is. You kind of think, wow, and the great thing about it is you don't need to make huge amounts. You just make small quantities, because you only need it's only a small part of the formula. And once it's carried in its vehicle, so it might go into like a sugary syrup, or it might just be taken with honey. Honey's a popular anapana that's used. Or you might have like you might take it with just warm water, or you might take it with a herbal decoction, or it's even used in medicated wines. There are a lot of medicated wines that will have alchemical ingredients in them too. So it's very prolific. It's a big part of the system. It's kind of not maybe so understood by people who are working with these medicines. When they understand the terminology and how it works, then they suddenly realize, actually, this is quite a big part of Ayurvedic medicine.
Yeah. Wow, this has been really cool, Andrew.
Yeah, sorry, it's a very difficult thing to compress into like.
Oh, no, yeah.
I hope I did a reasonable job.
You did a great job, yeah.
Absolutely.
Super cool.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if can I ask you one more question before you wrap up?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's about Shiyajit, because this has become a really popular thing lately, and like you hear about it, but a lot of people don't know what it actually is. And you talk about it in the book. So
I try to give you my opinion.
Could you briefly give us your opinion of it, like what it is, and how is it being over harvested? Is it like overhyped? What's going on with it? What's the tea?
I chemically tested quite a lot of the stuff that I bought over the years, and stuff that I brought back, because when I was in Sri Lanka, it was very, very cheap. I mean, literally, you could buy a bag full of it for $1. And now it's going for hundreds of dollars for just a few grams of it. So, I've tested it over the years. And when you look at when you get the spectrographic readouts of what's in it, they're all pretty much the same. There's kind of iron, there's carbon, there's calcium, there's a little bit of, it's just sort of very trace minerals. It's a sort of weird material, whether some people say it's very old and it's being, by the heat of the sun and the wind and the rain on the rocks, it's kind of exudated from the rocks. Or there's another theory that it might be kind of more plant-based, because it tends to be found more in crevices where you get plant material, and it could even be animal plant combinations, things living in those crevices contributing to that as well. I think the jury's kind of still out on what it actually is.
People don't even know what it is.
Wow.
If you read all the papers, there's arguments for, some people say it's definitely plant material. Some people say, no, it's definitely mineral. But we do know that, you can find this stuff, it's found above ground, below ground. In the UK, we have what we call the tar tunnels. So this is where Iron Bridge is. It's a very famous gorge with this big iron bridge that goes across it. They found, where they were excavating underneath the tar tunnels, it's a big cache of bitumen. And this bitumen was harvested by the Victorians, and they were sort of semi-purifying it, kind of warming it, filtering it, and it was used as liniment. They were applying it for arthritis, and then you got that tradition in like Egypt, where they would exhume the mummies. The mummies were bound with bitumen, and they were extracting that from the mummy. So literally, it was like ground mummies were being used for sort of medicine. So there's a long tradition of these oils or resins being used, and how much of it is pure. There's this kind of mixing going on. Are they mixing it with like birch oils or some of these gums? It's difficult to say. It's obviously, it seems to be situated mostly in the Himalayas. You've got like the Altai as well, range that is found there. There's a big area where they're found, like Pakistan, India, Nepal. It's certainly being mined at a feverish rate, and it's become very, very popular. It has definite qualities. It's water soluble. So if you did get a non-water soluble one, it's probably more like the tar tunnel material, which is more like a petroleum based. It's not so water soluble. It's water soluble. It tastes kind of disgusting. It's a bit like it's got an aroma like urine, like cow urine. It tastes slightly better than it smells. Generally, it's harvested as a rock. The rock is broken up, then it's boiled in water, and then filtered, and you remove all this kind of micaceous limestone, and you're just left with this resin, which you then cook down. Some people say don't cook it. It should only be dried under the sun. So they just mix the rocks with water and let the sediment rise to the top, and they skim it, and then that skim material is then dried and then powdered, and that's what's used. There's lots of different people say different things. So my experience has been, when I've tested a lot of it, it pretty much looks the same chemically. I find it's pretty good. I don't find it's one of my favorite. It's not one of my favorites to use. However, I did recently, a friend of mine asked me to prepare what was Shilajit Rasayana. So it's a kind of a semi-formulated. It's where you, rather than just doing the normal standard purification of it, it's cooked multiple times in cow urine. So you boil it literally like 8 times in cow's urine, and then you use guduchi and other herbs. And I must admit, that one I actually found more potent. I found that one much more user-friendly for me. Generally, I find it a bit too heating. If I take it, I start to feel hot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's one of those ones that the jury's out. I couldn't definitively say what it is, but chemically, when you test it, it's pretty much the same kind of elements are coming up. It's got very popular because it has a rejuvenating quality. In Unani, it's considered more, that's the Greco-Arabic medicine. It's considered to be more like, so it's like aphrodisiac. It's more that kind of quality. Whereas in Ayurvedically, it's kind of more like a urinary tract, kidney, Rasayana. It cleanses the sort of urinary tract as well. And it's a general rejuvenative and potentizer as well. But yeah, different uses. One interesting thing they say in Unani, they've got a little bit of a warning on it. They say their expression for it is that which grows. So if you take it, it grows that. So if you put a particular herb, or you combine it with something, the quality of that will grow in the body and will flourish. It's like a sort of a fertilizer. But they say you have to be very careful, because if you don't treat it right, if you combine it and you have a disease already, it will grow the disease. It will give potency or agency to the disease and create more problems. So hence it must be purified. So there's another take on it.
Wow.
So I wish I could definitively just say, oh yes, it's this and it's that. It's such a weird and unknown, but what I have been able to say about it, I've written in the book. I've given you a good kind of introductory to it, and I think there's a chemical. I think I've given you a breakdown of it chemically in there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, this is thank you for that. The synopsis of what Shilajit is.
I think it is.
What do you think it is?
May not be what it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, this whole book is such a great resource. So thank you for writing it. It's a great resource. Thank you to Aeon for putting it together too and sending us a copy.
Yeah, they did a really great job. I'm really pleased. I was a bit kind of like nervous when we were going through the process of putting it together, but when I saw the finished thing, I sort of breathed a sigh of relief. I thought, yeah, actually, this is a book I'd really like. So hopefully it just gives people it's a sort of a step in the right direction. It's like a toe in the water, get a sense of where it's at, what it can do, and hopefully sort of introduces it to people. And it's definitely getting more popular. I'll just say one round up by saying, when I was in India and Sri Lanka, I wouldn't say it was dying, but it was kind of reaching a point where people were struggling with it a little bit, because it's an involved process and it takes a lot of effort. There was more emphasis being put on other things, and people were finding it a bit tedious. But I've noticed in the last 10 years, it's getting, I guess things go in cycles, and it's getting quite popular again. There seems to be attracting a lot of people. If you look on Instagram, there are many people posting pictures in India, and particularly students working with it. So I think it's gaining momentum, and also with these kind of new diseases that are coming up now. We're told in the text that Rasa is always particularly good for autoimmune, enable us to survive new diseases, to fight all these new toxins. So I can see it's going to get more popular in years to come as, humanity gradually poisons itself. Hopefully these medicines will be there to help.
Like battling like EMFs or like things that are new to our bodies. Do you think they're gonna step up? These medicines will step up to the plate?
Yeah, I think it's like we're moving into an age where we require more. It's like these things are hard hitting. I mean, the minerals and the metals are like they're powerful. They've had thousands of years of absorbing
Sure.
ambient energies and then them being released in terms of the medicine. So whereas the plants work very quickly and the energy release is quite quick and simple, these take more processing to be able to release that. So that's why there's a lot of processing with them. But they're a little bit homeopathic in some sense. Like after you've taken it, they
Yeah.
continue working on some level.
Yeah.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem very homeopathic.
It also seems like something to I want to start putting a toe into the water with, because
yeah,
I mean
definitely.
it's very complicated. You have to put a lot of effort into doing it, but it seems like it creates some very valuable medicines too.
I mean, when I've done teaching with workshops, I mean, people come there a little bit sort of to start with it to break the ice is a bit hard, but once they get into it, people they warm to it quite quickly.
Yeah.
Start and they think, oh, I can do this. This is doable. But you just need somebody to instruct you. It's not really one of those things where you want to read a book and do it. It's better
Right.
to have somebody that's had direct experience with it.
So you're teaching workshops in the UK and in Europe?
In Europe at the moment, just in Germany, I have a friend who I use because he's got good premises. So it's in a good area. It's kind of quite remote. So it's a good area to do it. So we get students go there. It's like 3 or 4 days. And we sort of just task ourselves with 3, maybe 4 things to do, simple things. And we actually complete them. So, by the end of the period, they've actually completed the remedy. Obviously, some of these other things can take months, so it's not practical. But what I say is that the theory is the same. Once you understand the basic theory, just by doing that, you'll be able to do other things, or at least it begins to open the pathway and you can see where you're going with it. You can see the applications. And quite often, a lot of people come with Western herbalists already, or they have Western alchemists, and they already have a good understanding of this, and they can adapt it. It's adaptable to other systems as well. That's the great thing about Ayurveda. It loves being adapted. It works well with so many different things. So, quite often I've shown Western alchemists and they go, oh yeah, I never really thought about it like that. And then they've gone back and changed the way that they're doing the Western stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So how can people find out more about you, get in contact, get the book, all these kind of things?
So Aeon for the book, the Aeon website. I don't know, obviously, like Amazon or the regular. I don't really get so involved in the actual selling of the book, but yeah, I think it's readily available. There's a digital copy, so if you prefer it on your phone, I've actually got it on my phone. I was looking at it today. Actually, it's actually quite good. I quite like it. For me, I like to sort of dip in and out of books, so having something digital is quite handy. But there's that option. I've got a website which is naterapublishing.com, so you can put a link or something for people if they want to go and visit that. So that's earlier work. It's got the old version of the book on there, but it gives you a little bit of insight into what I've been doing. I've got some slideshows on there that you can look at to see some more things in detail. Yeah, and then just the courses really. I've got an Instagram page, so it's Vedic Alchemy is the Instagram page, and then I've even got a forum on Facebook, which is Indian Alchemy. So just groups and then Indian Alchemy, which you can join, and most of it's just free.
Cool.
And a Substack as well. Like a Substack one, you can go. That's kind of more. I'm trying to grow that to more like a paying thing because it takes a long time to do, and I do members only area, so you'd have to pay to join, but then you get access to extra material which you wouldn't normally get access to, when I go into much more detail about how to do.
And what's your Substack called?
I should know, shouldn't I? I'm terrible. These just open the page.
No rush. We can always edit out the pauses if need be.
Yeah, so it's just at Vedic Alchemy.
Okay.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're quite easy to find. I mean, some of the material is free on there. I've got a podcast I do as well.
Oh.
So, I try to interview people that are doing interesting things with Ayurveda, alchemy, Jyotish, palmistry, and all that kind of thing. So that's another resource if people. I interview lots of really interesting people, a bit like yourself. We're trying to get interesting people on to talk. So that's another resource if people want to go and listen to stuff.
What's your podcast called?
I shouldn't.
Putting you on the spot, Andrew.
When it's me, it's like really difficult to remember, isn't it?
You're like,
What's my channel called? Oh, so it's called Natera Alchemy on
Natera?
YouTube. Natera, so Netera, then Alchemy.
Cool.
And what does that mean? What does Natira mean?
It's an Egyptian thing. It's like the Nitas, like 9 cosmic principles. So it's just a name I had a long, long time ago, and I've never changed it. And sounds a bit like netra as well, because netra is like means the eyes, and in Ayurveda as well, like it's a bit like Jyoti again, isn't it? Like the
Seeing.
light, seeing,
Yeah.
and stuff. So
Yes, good name.
multiple interpretations depending on what day it is.
Cool.
All right, you passed the quiz. You go.
Well, listen, look, thank you very much for having me on. Appreciate you
Yes,
inviting
thank
me on
you.
and letting me speak about it. And yeah, I enjoy watching your podcast too. I've been
Thanks.
watching a few, so very interesting. You get great people on, so it's a really good channel.
Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Andrew. This was fabulous conversation.
Okay, take
Cheers.
care.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.